Mr. Trump's government is working, as I speak to you, to take away the right to unionize and to strike for government employees. Will the striking workers confront the army? It has happened before in American history. Are we going down that road again?
Richard Wolff warns, "I told you something was coming, and now it's here. A milestone pushing the country closer to fascism than ever before."
I call this one milestone to fascism. I don't use these words lightly, as I hope you have noticed, but I think something has just happened that we need to pay attention to in the context of being on the road to fascism and having just passed a very significant milestone. I am referring to the decision made this week to use approximately $9 billion worth of American taxpayers' money sent to Washington, D.C., and used by the Trump administration to buy roughly 10% of the company known as Intel, one of the major high-tech computer companies in the United States and therefore in the world. It was a company having economic difficulties. It had made some bad decisions. The value of its stocks had declined. It was widely known to be in trouble.
Richard asserts that the American government, in effect, handed $9 billion of taxpayer money to Intel, putting that power directly into the hands of its board of directors.
The government putting that money into that company in that way is a way of helping the corporation, giving them, in effect, $9 billion of taxpayer money allows the board of directors of Intel, they're the ones who decide what to do with that money, a chance to use it to improve the situation and the fortunes of that huge capitalist corporation. And that will benefit, of course, themselves as board members, top executives whose jobs and huge salaries will thereby be maintained or maybe even increased, and likewise the shareholders who own the company.
Richard explains why he calls it a milestone to fascism, because when the state funnels billions of taxpayer dollars to private corporations.
Why do I call this a milestone to fascism? Well, on one level, it's a simple definition. German fascism, Italian fascism, they were characterized by a merger that happened between the top levels of corporate capitalist enterprise on the one hand, and the top officials of the party government on the other. Once Hitler came to power in January of 1933, he proceeded quickly to bring these two together, to have government officials become members of boards of government, to use government boards of the corporations, to have government money help the corporations. And of course, in return, it was demanded that the corporations support the government in every conceivable way. That's why we call the merger of the top levels of government and corporate capitalism fascism. Please notice that the government comes together, takes over big business, not in order to help the condition of workers. That has nothing to do with it. It doesn't happen because it's not a point or purpose of this coming together. The coming together has an altogether different purpose: to support profitability, to support shareholders, to support corporate enterprise at the highest level.
Richard warns that when the government comes together with big business, it's not to improve the condition of workers, but to tighten control and protect the elites.
It's basically a government subsidy, but now it takes that new step. It isn't a tax cut. It isn't merely a grant or even a loan. It's we're becoming, we the government, owners. If the government owns 10%, it is probably the largest shareholder Intel has. Now let me show you where this leads. And of course I know because I know where it has led in the past. If the workers at Intel, and there are many thousands of them, were to decide that they don't want this or that policy of the Intel Corporation, and they have a strike, for example, which they are perfectly legally entitled to do, they will be striking against the government, which is a major, if not the major, owner of Intel. Will Mr. Trump, if he's the president at the time of such a strike, will he call in the military the way he's calling the military in to Los Angeles or Washington or Chicago or New York, or at least threatening to do so? Will the striking workers confront the army? It has happened before in American history. Are we going down that road again? Let me give you yet another example. National security is often mentioned by Mr. Trump and his assistants as somehow justifying or requiring a move like this. Well, suppose working people object, as I'm sure they will. Maybe Mr. Trump will decide that national security requires changing the rules so that unions can't strike. Say, for example, when the government is part owner of an enterprise.
Richard claims that Trump's government is working to strip away the rights of government employees, to unionize, to strike, and to defend their own interests.
Mr. Trump's government is working, as I speak to you, to take away the right to unionize and to strike for government employees. So we know what his position is likely to be. Will we soon have a new set of unions organized by the government and pushing the old independent unions that were created by workers out and bringing in the government-approved unions? That's what happened in Germany. That's what happened in Italy when they had fascism. And then there's the interesting recognition by members of the board of Intel, some of whom apparently did not know that this was going to happen. There's the question, if the United States government is the key owner of Intel, what is going to be the policy of countries around the world that might have thought of buying Intel products, high-tech computer-related products? They're going to be now worried, with much more reason than we had with the Chinese, that they're buying governmental products that might contain spying equipment, that might be reflective of the government's interest, not just dealing with a private enterprise called Intel. Countries that have a quarrel with the United States could now express their disinterest, their hostility, their opposition by not buying Intel products as a way of pushing back against the United States government. The United States did that with the Huawei Corporation from China, even though the government of China isn't a part and wasn't then of its board of directors the way Mr. Trump had. We are doing extraordinary things. We are taking enormous steps. The BRICS are threatened by their disunity, their differences, but they are also blessed by that disunity. China and India are meeting in China, working all this out. Politically, it's over.
Richard Wolff warns that Trump is going to freak out because of BRICS, the rising alliance that threatens America's economic grip on the world.
And where did the industry go? To the BRICS. To China above all else, to India, to Brazil. Not only to the BRICS, but largely to the BRICS. They became the new center. No one did that to us. We did it to ourselves, because that's how capitalism works. You want to celebrate capitalism, you want to give it a free rein, you want it to pursue profits, you believe in it, well, that's what it did. The gift it gives you, and the gift it keeps on giving, is the center of economics moving to the BRICS. Now the politics. The BRICS are where the people of this planet live. If you add up all the populations of all the countries that are members or associates in the BRICS, it's way more than half the people on this planet. The population of the United States is 4.5%. If you add the G7, double it, be generous, maybe 12%. 12% in the G7, 50 to 60%, if not more, in the BRICS. The two biggest countries on earth, China and India, are meeting in China, working all this out. Politically, it's over.
Richard asserts that more and more votes in the United Nations are ending up as everyone against the United States, leaving America increasingly isolated on the global stage.
More and more votes in the United Nations are everybody against the United States. It can't even hold on to its own allies half the time in the G7. Many votes are the whole world versus the United States or the United States and one or two other tiny politically, we are already isolated. It reflects the economic foundation beneath it, but it's politically kind of obvious. The United States chose to fight against Russia to punish Russia for invading in order to protect its border from the encroachment of NATO.
Whatever you think of that war, Russia is winning, while the United States and Western Europeans are steadily losing ground.
Whatever you think of that, Russia is winning. The United States and the Western Europeans have been losing. That's why the line of where the Russians control is now giving at least a third of over to the Russians already. And what happened there was a misunderstanding of the BRICS. Why is that? A political disaster like a lost? Yeah. Here was the mistake. The Americans thought that they could punish the Russians for invading by imposing on them massive sanctions, taking billions of money from them that they had stored in Europe, and refusing to buy the oil and gas, which are crucial exports for the Russian economy. One mistake was made. They didn't understand the BRICS. Because here's what Russia did. It said, okay, those sanctions would hurt if we had no way to get around them. Okay, you're not buying our oil and gas would really hurt if we can't find anyone else to sell it to. But they found a way to get around the sanctions, which they've done. And they got a way to find new customers for their oil and gas, which they've done.
Richard points out the solidarity of BRICS, nations once seen as peripheral now standing united as the core powerhouse of the new world economy.
The BRICS did all of that for them, with them. That's the solidarity you get if you're the core new powerhouse of the world economy. Now, finally, the military. And here's the ironic part of all this. The BRICS are a very diverse collection of countries. It's very easy to see that they have different relationships, one versus the other, with the United States. Some of them are still wrapped up in the Western-dominated global economic system that is shrinking, but is still a big, powerful presence. Some of them are Muslim, some of them are Hindu, some of them are neither, some of them are rich, others are quite poor. I mean, there are lots of disagreements, lots of differences, lots of ways that their unity is fragile. It's relatively new. One of the few things that is holding them together is the relentless hostility and enmity of the United States and Western Europe. It's not at all unusual, and most of you know it, that people who might otherwise be at each other's throats will become good friends if they have a common enemy. The BRICS have a common enemy. Doesn't have to be. The United States didn't have to become the enemy. Western Europe didn't have to. They've chosen to. They don't like a challenge, especially a successful one, to the role they used to have. But you know, the disunity is also an enormous strength. This is a message from the philosopher Hegel, the unity of opposites.
The BRICS are threatened by their disunity and internal differences, but at the same time, they are blessed by it because their diversity gives them reach across cultures, continents, and economies.
The BRICS are threatened by their disunity, their differences, but they are also blessed by that disunity, and I'm going to tell you why. Their disunity means they're not all relying on one of their number to be the military powerhouse. Yes, China is the richest member, and China will eventually overwhelm the others, if that's how they go, by its very size and its productivity. The only conceivable challenge to that might be India, but already India is doing that. But the disunity among them means they all have armies. You see, the unity of Europe, the European Union, never had that level of difference that they had their armies after World War II. They had it earlier, but after World War II, they made a decision they now deeply regret. The United States would take over the military. So today, the United States has a global military, 700 bases around the world to try to enforce its empire. But the rest of the G7 have no military to speak of. Laughable. No one takes the military seriously. They're not a global force. That's not true in the BRICS. China and India have, and Indonesia and other countries also have. So the irony is their disunity means they won't go the way Europe does, because Europe is now in danger of falling apart because it has no military, and the United States is not willing to play the role anymore. That's why the is going so badly for the West. Bottom line, we are in the presence of a historical shift. The United States has been trying now over 10 years to stop it. Here we go, folks. These numbers scream a simple message if you dare listen. This pattern, rise of the BRICS, decline of the G7, is going to change anytime soon.
Richard Wolff warns that Trump will melt down when he realizes this about BRICS, that their growing alliance directly threatens America's financial dominance.
I call this one the importance of the BRICS. And by that I mean, of course, the new global economic powerhouse comprised of those initials, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. At the very end of August, they have gathered, most of them, not all, but most, in China to celebrate a meeting of the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, which includes a number of BRICS members in China and in Asia, and also to celebrate victory over the Japanese 80 years ago at the end of World War II.
Richard asserts that BRICS has posed a growing challenge to the United States since the Biden administration, shifting economic power away from Washington's control.
But I want to talk to you about the BRICS, and I want you to understand not so much that the BRICS represent a challenge to the United States, which is what the Trump administration and the Biden administration shared as a view, but rather to get us to understand as a nation what the enormous importance of the BRICS has become. And that is as much in reaction to Biden and Trump as for reasons of their own. I think when I'm done, in the few minutes I will take, will leave you with the impression that you ought to have.
BRICS gives the impression of a single economic powerhouse, the new center of growth, wealth, and prosperity on the global stage.
That we, you and I, are living through an historic transformation. One economic powerhouse, the center of economic growth and wealth and prosperity, is giving way to another. This has happened many times in European history. It has happened many times in world history. Empires arise and they evolve and then they pass away, giving room to others. And sometimes we haven't had a dominating empire. We don't seem to need one, but we've had them for quite a while. They come and they go. BRICS is the new dominant economic powerhouse center. I'm going to show you that in a moment. The United States and its major allies, the so-called G7, that include beyond the United States, Japan, Canada, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany. They are now fading. They are not the dominant center anymore, and it is highly unlikely. I can't predict the future any more than anyone else can, but from everything I see, it's highly likely this pattern, rise of the BRICS, decline of the G7, is going to change anytime soon. So let's begin. In what sense can I speak of the dominant core economic powerhouse in the world being the BRICS today? And when I finish with the economics, I'll turn to the politics, and then I'll turn to the military.
Not because the military is so important, but because it's what frightens the United States and unsettles so many people watching global power shift.
Not because the military is all that important, but it's because that's what frightens the United States and so many people when it needn't. The simplest broad measure of economic bigness, economic power, economic strength is something called the GDP, the gross domestic product. The total value of goods and services produced in a year in a country. The United Nations and many others keep track of the GDP year in and year out of all countries. So we know, for example, what the GDP of the United States is, and we know what the GDP of China is. We likewise know, because we can add them up, what the GDP is of the United States and the 6 allies that make up the G7. And we know what the GDP is of China and its allies, namely now the BRICS, BRICS. Here we go, folks. These numbers scream a simple message if you dare listen. If you add up the GDP of the United States and its 6 major allies, the so-called G7, it works out to about 29% of the total output of our planet is accomplished by those 7 countries. We have 195 countries in the world, but those 7 alone do 28% of the world's output.
If you add China to the BRICS, their GDP comes out to roughly 34 to 35% of the world's total output, an economic weight the US can't ignore.
What about China and the BRICS? If you add them all up in the same way, they work out to be producing approximately 34 or 35% of the world's output. So please, simply understand, China and the BRICS are a bigger, larger in terms of output, and therefore richer in terms of product than the G7. That's been true since the year 2020, and the gap between them gets larger each year since 2020, including 2024 and 2025, as I speak to you. But more than that, the GDP, if you break it down, will tell us what has happened to the core manufacturing industry at the base of any economy. And that we all know because you can see it. Industry, which was once something that characterized Western Europe, only and then moved out of Western Europe, which lost much of its industry because it moved to the United States, to Japan, to other parts of the world. Well, it keeps moving. It always did. It always does. And starting in the 1970s, large industrial corporations in the United States, most of them, discovered that they could make more money, become more profitable by doing 3 things in a big way. Number 1, move production out of the United States to China, India, Brazil, other places. Nobody put up under their head. No one forced them. not the foreign government, which never had the power, nor the American government. They demanded the American government help them move abroad, maintain the military all over the world to make it safe to do business at a great distance. But they went and they set up their factories over there and they closed them here. And we all know which parts of America, New England, the Rust Belt, and large of the parts of the rest of the United States sit empty and idle because those companies made more money.